The Whitmore estate loomed like a fortress, its towering walls steeped in centuries of wealth, power, and unyielding tradition. The grandeur of the family's name was evident in every marble column and gold-trimmed chandelier that adorned the estate, but for Alexander Whitmore, it had always felt more like a cage. He stood before the massive oak doors of his father's study, shoulders squared, jaw tight. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged whiskey and unspoken expectations. His father, Charles Whitmore III, sat behind a grand mahogany desk, his expression as cold as the empire he commanded. "You will marry Celeste Hart." The words were not a request. They were a decree. Alexander's chest tightened. He had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have softened the crushing weight of those 5 words. "I'm not interested in marriage," he said, his voice even, calculated. Charles sighed, his disappointment heavy. "You don't have a choice." Alexander clenched his fists at his sides, resisting the urge to lash out. He had spent his entire life walking the fine line between obedience and rebellion, but this was too much. "Father, you think I don't know?" Charles cut him off, his voice like steel. "I know everything about you, Alexander. Your life, your inclinations." The word was spat like poison. The silence was suffocating. Alexander felt his throat tighten. "This is not about what you want," Charles continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's about what's necessary. Our legacy, the company, the Whitmore name. I will not allow you to throw it all away." Alexander swallowed hard. He had spent years hiding, pretending, enduring, all for the sake of this family. But now he was being asked to sacrifice everything, his future, his happiness, his truth, for a marriage built on a lie. And Celeste Hart? A woman he had met only a handful of times, a woman who, for reasons unknown, had agreed to this absurd arrangement. His thoughts drifted to Oliver Hayes, the man who had made him feel something real in a world built on appearances. The man who had once begged him to walk away from this life before it consumed him whole. But the Whitmores did not walk away. They endured. "When?" Alexander asked, his voice hollow. Charles leaned back in his chair, satisfied. 3 months. 3 months to prepare for a marriage that would never be real. 3 months to bury the last shred of hope that he could ever live his life on his own terms. 3 months before the chains around his wrists became permanent. Celeste Hart stared at her own reflection, her emerald green eyes flickering with something unreadable. The delicate lace of the wedding gown she was being fitted for clung to her slender frame. But she felt no excitement, no joy, only a gnawing emptiness. She had agreed to this. She had walked willingly into a contract that would bind her to a man she barely knew. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. "Miss Hart, the adjustments are almost finished," the seamstress said, stepping back to admire her work. Celeste forced a polite smile. "It's perfect." But nothing about this was perfect. Behind her, in the grand mirror, she saw Victoria Lancaster standing near the door, watching her like a hawk. Alexander's sister was tall, poised, and ruthless, an enforcer of the Whitmore legacy just as much as their father was. Victoria approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor with quiet authority. "You look beautiful," she said, though her tone was devoid of warmth. Celeste turned, her fingers tightening around the bodice of her dress. "I assume you're here to ensure I don't back out." Victoria's red lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I prefer to think of it as making sure we understand each other." Celeste met her gaze evenly. "We do." Victoria studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Alexander is complicated. He is not the type of man to offer love or tenderness. I suggest you remember that." A bitter laugh almost escaped Celeste's lips. If only Victoria knew that love was the last thing she was looking for. She had already been burned once, already lost more than she cared to remember. "I'm not expecting a fairy tale, Victoria." "Good," Victoria said smoothly. "Then this should be simple." Simple. Nothing about this was simple. Celeste knew Alexander was hiding something. She had seen the way his jaw tensed during their brief meetings, the way his eyes never quite met hers. He didn't want this marriage any more than she did. And that was fine. Because she wasn't here for a husband. She was here to escape. Celeste turned back to the mirror, but this time, she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her. Alexander sat in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him in a golden blur. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, though he had barely touched it. Oliver was pacing. "You can't do this," Oliver said, his voice sharp with frustration. Alexander exhaled slowly. "I don't have a choice." "That's bullshit," Oliver snapped, turning to face him. His blue eyes, usually filled with warmth, were stormy with hurt. "You always have a choice, Alexander." "You don't understand," Alexander murmured. "Don't I?" Oliver stepped closer, his voice quieter now, raw with something deeper. "I understand that you're about to marry a woman you don't love. I understand that you're choosing to live a lie instead of fighting for yourself. For us." Alexander squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, as if that could make the ache go away. "This isn't about us," Oliver scoffed. "Of course it is. You think this marriage will make you safe? That it will protect you? It will destroy you, Alexander." For a fleeting moment, Alexander let himself imagine a different life. A life where he didn't have to hide. A life where he could reach for Oliver without fear, without consequence. But that life was impossible. His father had made sure of that. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Oliver's face twisted with pain. "No," he said, stepping back. "You're not sorry. If you were, you wouldn't be doing this." Alexander remained silent. After a long moment, Oliver ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "Tell me one thing," he said, voice hoarse. "If things were different, if you weren't a Whitmore, if you didn't have to carry this damn legacy, would you choose me?" Alexander looked at him then, really looked at him. His chest tightened, his throat burned, and yet he couldn't lie. Not to Oliver. "Yes." It was barely a whisper, but Oliver heard it. A bitter smile ghosted across Oliver's lips. "Then I hope one day you remember that." And with that, Oliver walked away, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of a decision he could never take back. The grand Whitmore estate was bathed in golden light as guests arrived for the first official dinner announcing Alexander and Celeste's engagement. It was all an illusion, an orchestrated spectacle, to maintain the legacy of one of the most powerful families in the country. Alexander stood near the balcony, gripping the edge of his whiskey glass so tightly he thought it might shatter. He had mastered the art of pretending long ago, but tonight, the weight of his father's expectations and Victoria's silent control felt suffocating. Celeste entered the room with effortless grace, her emerald dress hugging her figure in a way that commanded attention. She was stunning, there was no denying that. But the way she held herself, the poised but wary glint in her eyes, told Alexander she was just as trapped as he was. "Shall we put on a show?" she murmured as she reached his side, her voice dripping with something between amusement and resignation. Alexander downed the last of his drink before setting the glass aside. "Do we have a choice?" Celeste smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not unless you're ready to watch your empire burn." Their gazes locked for a moment, two strangers forced into an alliance neither of them wanted. Alexander knew nothing about her beyond what the press had painted. The daughter of a once prominent family whose wealth had all but vanished, a woman in desperate need of security, much like himself. Victoria approached then, her usual mask of cold perfection intact. "Father expects you both to make a toast," she said smoothly. "Try to look in love." Alexander clenched his jaw. "Is that an order?" Victoria's smile was saccharine. "Call it guidance." Celeste looped her arm through his, her touch feather-light but firm. "Shall we, fiancé?" Alexander exhaled, smoothing his expression into one of quiet adoration. He could do this. He had spent his life performing, but as they stepped forward to address the crowd, his eyes involuntarily flickered to the back of the room, where Oliver stood, watching. Waiting. Oliver Hayes never should have come. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a room filled with New York's elite, watching the man he loved prepare to toast to a future built on a lie. His grip tightened around the stem of his champagne glass as he forced himself to remain still, to keep his expression neutral even as his heart waged war against his reason. He knew what this marriage meant, knew what Alexander thought he was protecting. But watching him stand beside Celeste, watching the way she leaned into him, the way they played their roles so effortlessly, it was unbearable. "Is this your idea of torture?" Oliver turned to find Victoria Lancaster at his side, sipping her wine with a knowing smirk. "I didn't come for your entertainment," Oliver said coolly. Victoria tilted her head. "No, I suppose you came for him." She followed his gaze toward Alexander and Celeste. A wasted effort, wouldn't you say? Oliver's jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that. Oh, but I do, Victoria murmured. You see, my dear Oliver, my brother has always belonged to this family, and if you truly loved him, you would stop trying to rip him away from it. Oliver turned to her then, eyes blazing. If you truly loved him, you wouldn't be forcing him into a life that will destroy him. Victoria laughed, soft and unbothered. Alexander isn't being forced. He's choosing this. Oliver hesitated. Because wasn't that the truth? Alexander had made his choice, and maybe it was time Oliver accepted it. Alexander raised his glass, his voice steady, his smile impeccably placed. To family, to legacy, and to new beginnings. Beside him, Celeste followed suit, her own performance flawless. The guests erupted into applause, and in that moment, Alexander realized that the walls were closing in. Because no matter how much he told himself this was just a contract, a necessary sacrifice, he had never felt more trapped in his life. The engagement dinner had ended, but the echoes of forced laughter and clinking glasses still lingered in Alexander's mind. He stood in his private study, staring out at the city lights, hands resting on the edge of his desk as if grounding himself to something real. Behind him, the soft sound of heels against marble announced Celeste's arrival. You looked the part tonight, she said, her voice smooth but edged with something unreadable. Alexander turned to face her. She had changed out of her emerald gown into something more comfortable, yet there was still an air of effortless elegance about her. I've had years of practice, he said flatly. Celeste studied him, tilting her head slightly. I have a feeling you weren't always this detached. Alexander exhaled through his nose, unwilling to engage. I assume you didn't come here to discuss my emotional state. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No. I came because I think it's time we discuss the terms of this arrangement. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. I assumed my father already did that for us. Oh, he certainly outlined what's expected, Celeste said, stepping closer. But I don't particularly enjoy being controlled. So let's set our own rules, shall we? Alexander arched a brow. I'm listening. Celeste's gaze was unwavering. I don't expect you to love me or even pretend when we're alone. I don't care about intimacy. This is a business transaction, and I want it to remain that way. A flicker of something, relief perhaps, crossed Alexander's face. Agreed. But, Celeste continued, her voice soft but firm, there's something you need to know about me. Alexander studied her carefully. Go on. Celeste hesitated, a shadow passing over her expression. Then, in a lower voice, she said, You're not the only one hiding something, Alexander. Silence stretched between them. His mind ran through possibilities, but before he could ask, she stepped back. Just know that I won't stand in your way, as long as you don't stand in mine. Alexander's gaze darkened with curiosity. What exactly are you running from, Celeste? For the first time, her confidence faltered. But just as quickly, she masked it. We all have our demons, don't we? She said lightly, before turning toward the door. She paused at the threshold. Good night, fiancé. And just like that, she was gone, leaving Alexander with more questions than answers. Oliver Hayes sat at the bar of a high-end lounge, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. He had thought coming here would help clear his mind, that the distractions of music and laughter would drown out the ache pressing against his ribs. But all he could think about was him, Alexander Whitmore, the man who had looked right at him during that toast and said nothing. Rough night? The voice was feminine, silky. Oliver turned to see a woman sliding onto the stool beside him, blonde, sharp-eyed, exuding power. Depends on who's asking, he muttered. She smirked. Victoria Lancaster. Oliver tensed. Let me guess, she continued, twirling the stem of her martini glass. You're sitting here, brooding, wondering if he'll ever come to his senses. Oliver clenched his jaw. And let me guess, you're here to remind me that he never will. Victoria let out a soft laugh. Oh, Oliver, you already know that, don't you? He looked away, gripping the glass in his hand. Victoria leaned in slightly. But what if I told you there was another way? Oliver frowned. What the hell are you talking about? Victoria's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. I have a proposition for you. Oliver leaned back against the bar, his fingers tightening around his glass. His instincts screamed not to trust Victoria Lancaster. She was a Whitmore, through and through. Calculating, manipulative, and dangerous, but she had his attention. You expect me to believe you're offering me a way to stop this wedding? Oliver scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Why would you want that? You need Alexander to marry Celeste to maintain your precious family legacy. Victoria smirked, sipping her martini with an air of amusement. You give me too much credit, Oliver. I don't need Alexander to marry Celeste. I need control. And sometimes, control means removing certain obstacles. Oliver narrowed his eyes. And you consider Celeste an obstacle? Victoria's lips curled slightly. Let's just say Celeste isn't as harmless as you might think. Oliver exhaled sharply. If you have something to say, say it. Victoria leaned in, lowering her voice. Celeste Hart has a past that doesn't align with our family's standards, secrets she'd rather keep buried. She studied Oliver carefully. If those secrets were to come to light, well, this entire charade would crumble. Oliver shook his head, rubbing a hand down his face. And you think I'd go along with this? You think I'd help you destroy her? Victoria tilted her head. She's standing in your way, isn't she? Oliver's stomach twisted. Yes, Celeste was marrying Alexander. Yes, she was part of the lie, but he wasn't like Victoria. He wouldn't stoop to manipulation and deceit just to get what he wanted. She's not my enemy, Oliver muttered. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Then you're weaker than I thought. She stood, finishing the last sip of her drink before placing the empty glass on the bar. But don't worry, whether you help me or not, I'll find a way. Oliver watched as she walked away, his gut churning with unease. Something told him that whatever Victoria was planning, it wouldn't end well for anyone. Alexander sat in his study, the fire crackling in the dimly lit room. His father had already retired for the night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than usual. Celeste entered without knocking, her emerald silk robe flowing around her as she approached the liquor cabinet. Without a word, she poured herself a glass of brandy and took a slow sip. You always make yourself at home, Alexander remarked dryly. Celeste smirked over the rim of her glass. I am your fiancé, after all. Alexander exhaled, rubbing his temples. Did you come here for a reason, or are you just enjoying the fine selection of liquor? Celeste's expression shifted slightly, something more serious flickering beneath the playful exterior. Your sister cornered me after the dinner, she said, watching him carefully. She made it very clear that I'm being watched. Alexander's jaw tightened. Victoria likes to think she controls everything. She doesn't trust me, Celeste continued, taking another sip. And I can't say I blame her. If I were her, I wouldn't trust me either. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Should I be concerned? Celeste set her glass down and stepped closer, placing her hands on the edge of his desk. That depends, she murmured. Are you planning to betray me? Alexander met her gaze evenly. Are you? A slow smirk spread across her lips. Not unless you give me a reason to. They stood there for a moment, locked in silent understanding. This marriage wasn't built on love. It wasn't built on trust. But for now, they needed each other. And that was the only thing keeping them both from tearing this whole illusion apart. The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds over the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows through the grand halls. Alexander sat at the dining table, staring blankly at his untouched coffee. Across from him, Victoria read the morning paper, her expression unreadable. You look exhausted, dear brother, she mused without looking up. Alexander exhaled through his nose. It's been an eventful week. Victoria folded the newspaper with deliberate precision and set it aside. And yet, things are only beginning. Alexander's fingers tapped against his cup. If you came to gloat, Victoria, I'm not in the mood. I never gloat. She tilted her head. I warn. Alexander's patience thinned. Warn me about what? Victoria leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Celeste. His body tensed. What about her? I had her background checked, Victoria continued smoothly. And let's just say, she's not the innocent socialite she pretends to be. Alexander's eyes darkened. I'm not interested in your paranoia. Victoria sighed dramatically. You should be. Because when her past catches up to her, it won't be just her reputation that suffers, it'll be yours too. He clenched his jaw. What are you implying? Victoria slid a folder across the table. See for yourself. Alexander hesitated before opening it. The first page alone made his breath hitch. A series of documents, news clippings, and financial records. Pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture he hadn't expected. Celeste Hart wasn't just a woman with family debt. She was running from something. Or someone. Celeste fastened the pearl necklace around her neck, her reflection in the mirror flawless. She had worn many faces in her life. This was just another mask. A knock at the door made her pause. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her pulse quickened as she crossed the room, hesitating before opening it. Her breath caught. A man stood there, tall. Dark eyes filled with something between amusement and menace. "Hello, Celeste," he drawled. "Did you really think you could disappear?" Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let her expression falter. "What do you want, Damien?" Damien Locke stepped forward slightly, his gaze sharp. "You owe me." Celeste tightened her grip on the doorframe. "I don't owe you anything." Damien's smirk was chilling. "That's not how I remember it." Her mind raced. She had been careful. She had buried that part of her past, but somehow he had found her. "I suggest you leave," she said coolly. Damien leaned in just enough for her to catch the scent of his cologne. "You and I both know that's not happening." Celeste refused to let him see her panic. But inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Her past had caught up with her. And if Alexander found out the truth, everything would fall apart. Celeste sat in the dim light of her apartment, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the vanity table. Damien's presence lingered in the air, even after he had gone, leaving behind the suffocating weight of old mistakes. She had spent years running, carefully constructing a new life, a new identity, only for it all to come crashing down with a single knock on her door. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She had to think. She had to act. Before it was too late. Alexander paced his study, the folder Victoria had given him still open on his desk. He had read through every document, every clipped article. Celeste Hart had secrets, and he had agreed to marry a woman he barely knew. His mind replayed every interaction they'd had, every glance, every careful word. She had always seemed composed, in control. But now he could see the cracks. The way she had avoided questions about her past, the way her eyes darted away when she thought he wasn't looking. She wasn't just a woman running from financial ruin. She was hiding something bigger, and he needed to know what. His fingers hovered over his phone before he finally called her. She answered on the second ring. "Alexander, where are you?" His voice was sharp, controlled. There was a pause. "At home. I'm coming over." Silence. "Then why?" Alexander's grip tightened around his phone. "Because I don't like being kept in the dark." Another pause, then softly, "You're not the only one." The line went dead. Alexander exhaled sharply, grabbing his coat. One thing was certain. This marriage was about to become even more complicated. Celeste's apartment, 20 minutes later. A knock sounded at her door, and Celeste already knew who it was. She steeled herself before opening it. Alexander stood there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried something dangerous, something calculating. "We need to talk," he said simply. Celeste stepped aside, letting him in. The moment the door closed, he turned to her. "Who is Damien Locke?" Her breath hitched. She should have known. Victoria had set the wheels in motion, but Celeste wasn't ready to give up her secrets. Not yet. Celeste's heartbeat hammered against her ribs as Alexander's gaze bore into her. The name Damien Locke hung heavy in the air, suffocating, unrelenting. She forced herself to remain composed, crossing her arms. "Where did you hear that name?" Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Victoria had you investigated." His voice was low, almost dangerous. "She seems to believe you're hiding something. I want to know if she's right." Celeste let out a slow breath. Of course, Victoria had done her homework. She should have anticipated this. But she hadn't expected Alexander to confront her this soon. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said carefully. "Not yet." Alexander's jaw tensed. "Not yet?" Celeste met his gaze evenly. "We're playing a game, Alexander. You hide things from me. I hide things from you. But if we start exposing each other now, this entire arrangement will fall apart." His eyes darkened. "So you admit it? You are hiding something." She hesitated. Then finally she nodded. "Yes." Alexander exhaled through his nose, as if weighing his next move. "And should I be concerned?" Celeste tilted her head. "That depends on whether you trust me." Alexander let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Trust isn't exactly the foundation of this marriage." she smirked. Exactly. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Alexander ran a hand through his hair. Damien Locke. Who is he to you? Celeste hesitated before responding. Someone I should have never crossed paths with. Alexander studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he turned toward the door. I won't push, he said quietly. Not yet. Then he left, the air between them heavier than before. Celeste let out a shaky breath. She had bought herself time, but she knew Damien wouldn't wait forever. Victoria leaned back in her leather chair, watching as Oliver paced across her office. I'm not helping you ruin Celeste, Oliver snapped, his frustration evident. Whatever game you're playing, leave me out of it. Victoria sighed, tapping her manicured nails against her desk. I don't need your help, Oliver. I just thought you'd be interested in knowing that Celeste is no saint. Oliver shot her a glare. No one in this family is. Victoria chuckled. Touche. Oliver exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. What do you even want from me? Victoria leaned forward. Simple. I want you to prepare yourself. For what? A slow smile spread across her lips. For the moment, Alexander realizes that this marriage is a ticking time bomb. Oliver clenched his jaw. And when that happens? Victoria's eyes gleamed. That's when you remind him of who he really is. Celeste sat in the dim glow of her apartment, the past clawing at her like a specter refusing to be silenced. Damien Locke had found her. That alone was enough to unravel everything. She knew the Whitmores would never tolerate a scandal. If Alexander learned the full extent of her past, if he realized the real reason she had agreed to this marriage, he would destroy her. Her hands tightened around the fabric of her dress as a knock echoed through the room. Her stomach clenched. Not again. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Damien. It was Oliver. Celeste blinked, caught off guard. What are you doing here? Oliver studied her, his expression unreadable. You're in trouble. A dry laugh left her lips. That's an understatement. Oliver exhaled sharply, stepping inside without invitation. Look, I don't trust Victoria, but when she starts digging, it means she's found something worth exposing. Celeste's throat tightened. She told you about Damien. Oliver nodded, but not everything. And I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before this explodes. Celeste hesitated. Then finally, she closed the door behind him. Alexander sat in his office, reviewing contracts he had read twice but couldn't focus on. His mind was elsewhere, on Celeste, on the secrets hanging between them. Then his phone rang. It was Victoria. I assume this is important, Alexander said flatly. Oh, quite. Victoria's voice was silk and steel. Your fiancé had a visitor tonight. Care to guess who? Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. Who? Oliver. The name was a punch to the gut. Alexander forced his voice to remain even. And? Victoria sighed dramatically. Darling, aren't you the least bit curious why your fiancé is entertaining your ex in her home? Alexander's jaw clenched. Stay out of this, Victoria. Too late, she purred. The game is already in motion. The call ended, leaving Alexander gripping his phone with white-knuckled intensity. He trusted Oliver. But he didn't trust Celeste, and now he had to find out what the hell was going on. Celeste ran a hand through her hair, pacing as Oliver leaned against her kitchen counter. If Damien's back, it means I don't have much time, she muttered. Oliver watched her carefully. What does he want? Celeste swallowed hard. He wants me to pay for what I took from him. Oliver's brows furrowed. And what did you take? Her throat was dry. Money, power, and his freedom. Oliver let out a low whistle. That's quite the trifecta. Celeste met his gaze. If he exposes me, Alexander will call off this marriage. Oliver exhaled. And that's a bad thing? Celeste hesitated. It's not that simple. Before Oliver could press further, another knock sounded at the door. Celeste's heart stilled. Oliver frowned. Expecting someone? She shook her head. No. Slowly, she walked to the door, inhaling sharply before pulling it open. Alexander stood there. His gaze flickered to Oliver before settling on her. Something dark swirled behind his eyes. Am I interrupting something? Alexander stood in the doorway, his sharp gaze flickering between Celeste and Oliver, tension thick enough to cut. Celeste forced herself to remain composed. Alexander. Oliver straightened but didn't move. This isn't what you think. Alexander let out a cold, humorless laugh. Oh, then enlighten me. What exactly is this? Celeste knew she had to act quickly. If she hesitated for even a second, Alexander would jump to the worst conclusions, and considering the lies already piling up between them, she couldn't afford that. Oliver was just leaving, she said smoothly, stepping forward as if to place herself between them. Oliver hesitated before sighing. Yeah, I was. He glanced at Alexander, expression unreadable. Think before you do something you'll regret. Alexander said nothing as Oliver walked past him, out into the night. The door clicked shut. Now it was just the two of them. Celeste folded her arms, meeting Alexander's piercing stare. Are you here to interrogate me? Alexander's jaw ticked. I'm here to understand why my fiancé is having private conversations with my ex-lover in the middle of the night. Celeste tilted her head. Would you rather I lie to you, or would you rather hear the truth? Alexander's throat bobbed, but his voice remained steady. The truth, Celeste exhaled. Damien Locke found me. Alexander's entire body went rigid. The name alone was enough to confirm what Victoria had hinted at. And what does he want? He asked, voice tight. Celeste hesitated before responding. Revenge. A muscle feathered in Alexander's jaw. For what? She swallowed hard. For taking everything from him. Silence. Alexander processed that slowly, his gaze unreadable. Then, finally, he asked, Why didn't you tell me? Celeste let out a bitter laugh. Because we don't owe each other the truth, remember? His lips pressed into a thin line. I don't like being lied to. Celeste stepped closer, meeting his stormy eyes. Then we have something in common. A charged silence stretched between them. Alexander knew she was hiding things. He knew she was dangerous. But for the first time, Celeste wondered if he was starting to realize something else entirely. That maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. Victoria sat in her office, sipping a glass of red wine, when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. A message. From Damien Locke. Her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. Damien, it's time to make our move. Victoria leaned back in her chair, eyes gleaming. Let's begin. The city hummed with an eerie stillness as Alexander drove back to the Whitmore estate, his mind clouded with thoughts of Celeste, Damien, and the tightening noose around his life. He had built his world on control. Calculated decisions, carefully managed relationships, unwavering precision. But Celeste had disrupted that. She was dangerous. And yet, he wasn't entirely sure if she was a threat to him, or if they were standing on the same sinking ship. His phone buzzed. Victoria, with a sigh, he answered. What do you want? Her voice was sickeningly smooth. Oh, dear brother, always so suspicious. Maybe because you always have a motive, he snapped. She chuckled. Then let me save you the guessing game. I have something you'll want to see. A message popped up on his screen. A photo. Alexander's grip on the wheel tightened as he glanced at it. It was a picture of Celeste, with Damien Locke. They were in a dimly lit restaurant, seated too closely. Damien's fingers rested on Celeste's wrist, and her expression was unreadable. Victoria's voice purred in his ear. How much longer do you plan on pretending she's innocent? Alexander clenched his jaw. Where did you get this? Victoria sighed. You wound me, brother. I know things. She didn't tell me she met him, Alexander muttered, anger flickering beneath his skin. Of course she didn't, Victoria mused. Because she's not just a pawn in this game, Alexander. She's playing her own. Alexander's grip tightened. He didn't know if it was anger at Celeste, at Victoria, or at himself, for even for a second, trusting someone in this mess. Victoria's voice turned softer, but no less dangerous. She's lying to you. They all are, and if you don't act now, it'll be too late. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the photo again. His fiancée, with the man she claimed to fear, his pulse thundered. He needed answers. And this time, Celeste wasn't going to escape without telling him the truth. Celeste's hands were ice cold as she sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts spiraling. She had gone to meet Damien because she had to. She needed to know what he wanted, how much danger she was in. But the moment she had seen the gleam in his dark eyes, she had known. He wasn't here for a simple transaction. He wanted to destroy her. And now she could feel the walls closing in. Her phone buzzed. Alexander. She swallowed hard before answering. His voice was razor sharp. You lied to me. Her stomach dropped. Alexander. You met him, he bit out. You met Damien Locke and you didn't tell me. Celeste's breath hitched. She knew in that moment someone had told him. Victoria. Of course. Let me explain. No. Alexander cut her off, his voice ice cold. You're going to tell me everything, right now. A long pause, then softly, or this marriage ends tonight. Celeste gripped her phone, her breath shallow. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, or this marriage ends tonight. She had always been good at lying, at hiding, but something in his voice told her that this was the breaking point. Come over, she said quietly. A pause, then, I'm already outside. Her pulse jumped. She barely had time to steady herself before a sharp knock came at the door. Celeste opened it to find Alexander standing there, his jaw tight, his blue-gray eyes burning with quiet fury. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She shut the door behind him. I was going to tell you. Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. Then why didn't you? Celeste hesitated. Because I knew how you'd react. Alexander let out a short, humorless laugh. And how should I react, Celeste? You told me Damien was a threat, someone you feared. And then Victoria sends me a picture of you having dinner with him? Celeste folded her arms, her voice sharp. You think I wanted to meet him? I think you chose to. A heavy silence settled between them. Then Celeste exhaled. I went to see him because I needed to know what he wanted. Damien isn't just some mistake from my past. He's a man who doesn't let things go. Alexander narrowed his eyes. And what exactly did you take from him? Celeste swallowed hard. I ruined him. Alexander stared at her. She turned away, pacing slightly, rubbing her arms. Years ago, I was engaged to Damien. Alexander stiffened. Celeste let out a shaky breath. He was charming at first, but behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Controlling, obsessive, dangerous. Her voice wavered slightly, but she forced herself to continue. He built his empire through illegal deals, blackmail, and worse. I found out, and I took the evidence to the authorities. Alexander's jaw tightened. And that's how he lost everything. Celeste nodded. He was arrested, spent 3 years in prison before his lawyers found a way to get him out. And now, she turned to face Alexander. He's back, and he wants revenge. Silence. Alexander didn't move. His face was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Something dark, dangerous. Then finally he asked, Why didn't you tell me this before? Celeste hesitated before speaking the truth. Because I didn't trust you. His eyes flashed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he took a step closer. And now? Celeste swallowed hard. I don't know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally, Alexander exhaled. I can protect you. Celeste let out a bitter laugh. I don't need protecting. His gaze darkened. That's not what it looked like tonight. She hated that he was right. Alexander took another step toward her, his voice softer now, lower. If you want this marriage to work, even as an illusion, then you don't keep things from me. Do you understand? Celeste met his gaze, something shifting between them. Only if you do the same. A slow, knowing smirk tugged at Alexander's lips. Then I guess we're at an impasse. For the first time, Celeste felt something dangerous between them. Something real. And that terrified her more than Damien ever could. Victoria leaned against the sleek marble bar, watching as Damien Locke took a slow sip of his whiskey. You planted the photo, Damien murmured, amusement in his voice. Clever. Victoria smirked. I don't like uncertainty, and I hate Celeste. Damien chuckled darkly. Well then, we already have something in common. Victoria turned to him, swirling the wine in her glass. Let's talk about how we get rid of her. Damien's eyes gleamed. Now that is a conversation I'm interested in. The city stretched beneath the penthouse window, bathed in the cold glow of moonlight. Victoria Lancaster sat in the private lounge of an exclusive club, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as she watched Damien Locke across the table. He looked every bit the predator she remembered. Dark, composed, and utterly ruthless. You want Celeste out of the picture, Damien said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. And I want her to pay for what she did. It seems we have mutual interests. Victoria smirked. Then let's stop wasting time. Damien leaned back, amused. You always were the sharpest of the Whitmores. Victoria tilted her head. And yet Alexander still refuses to see it. Damien chuckled. You're not wrong. Your brother is powerful, but he has one fatal flaw. He cares, Victoria finished for him, her eyes dark with satisfaction. Damien nodded. And that's why Celeste still has a foothold in his life. If you want to get rid of her, you need to make sure Alexander turns against her completely. Victoria sighed, studying the deep red liquid in her glass. I need this marriage to fail. If Celeste stays, she'll weaken him. And a weak Alexander is dangerous for the Whitmore legacy. Damien smirked. Well, lucky for you, I'm quite good at making people disappear. Victoria's gaze lifted sharply. I don't need her gone. Just destroyed. Damien's expression darkened. That I can do. Victoria set down her glass with a satisfied smile. Then let's begin. Celeste barely had a moment to breathe after Alexander's confrontation before she found herself sitting across from him in his study. The air between them was charged, neither trusting the other, yet both bound to the same precarious fate. Alexander's fingers tapped against his whiskey glass as he studied her. Victoria is watching you. Celeste smirked. When isn't she? She's not going to stop, he continued. And now that she's working with Damien, you're in more danger than ever. Celeste frowned. How do you know she's working with him? Alexander exhaled. Because I know my sister, and Victoria doesn't involve herself in anything unless she's playing the long game. Celeste leaned forward, her voice softer now. And what's your long game, Alexander? His jaw tightened slightly. I don't play games. Celeste let out a quiet laugh. That's the biggest lie you've ever told. For a moment, something flickered in his gaze, something raw, almost vulnerable. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Finally, Alexander spoke. You need to stay close to me. If Damien and Victoria are working together, then you don't have the luxury of running anymore. Celeste swallowed hard. And if I don't want to be your damsel in distress? A smirk ghosted over Alexander's lips. Then don't be. Silence stretched between them. Then finally, Alexander leaned forward, lowering his voice. But don't forget, Celeste, you're not the only one with secrets. Her breath hitched slightly. And what exactly are you hiding, Alexander? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, draining the last of his whiskey before walking toward the door. Just before he left, he turned to her. You wanted trust? Earn it. And then he was gone, leaving Celeste alone with the weight of his words. Damien sat in his car, his fingers drumming against the leather steering wheel as he watched Celeste's building from the shadows. He had spent years in prison, years waiting for the moment he could reclaim what was his. And now, it was finally within reach. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips. Celeste thought she could outrun him. But the game had only just begun. The Whitmore estate was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only came before a storm. Alexander stood in his study, staring out at the sprawling gardens, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Celeste was hiding something. He had always known that. But now, with Damien Locke circling like a vulture and Victoria sharpening her knives, the game had shifted. He had spent his life mastering control. But this time, he wasn't sure if he could control what was coming next. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of heels against the marble floor. Celeste. She stepped inside, wearing confidence like armor, but he could see the tension in her posture. I assume you didn't call me here for small talk. Alexander turned, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. No, Celeste crossed her arms. Then let's not waste time. Alexander exhaled, his voice low. Victoria and Damien are planning something. Celeste didn't flinch, but he saw the way her fingers curled slightly. They won't stop until they get what they want, he continued, which means we need to act first. Celeste studied him carefully. And what exactly are you suggesting? Alexander took a step closer. A counterattack. She arched a brow. You want to fight back? A smirk ghosted over his lips. I want to win. Celeste let out a slow breath. And how do you propose we do that? Alexander's voice was deadly calm. We give them what they want, on our terms. A heavy silence stretched between them. Then finally, Celeste tilted her head. You want to set a trap? Alexander nodded. And you're going to help me do it. Victoria sat in an exclusive rooftop lounge, the city lights flickering like a constellation of power beneath her. Across from her, Damien Locke leaned back in his chair, the predator's gleam in his eyes. You're sure this will work? Damien mused, sipping his drink. Victoria smirked. My brother is predictable. He may be ruthless in business, but when it comes to his personal life, he's a slave to his own guilt. Damien chuckled darkly. And Celeste? Victoria's expression hardened. She's in way over her head. The moment we expose her, Alexander will have no choice but to discard her. Damien tilted his glass toward her. Then let's make sure he does. Victoria clinked her glass against his. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was watch it unfold. Celeste sat on the edge of Alexander's desk studying the man before her. If we go through with this, there's no turning back. Alexander met her gaze. I don't plan on turning back. A charged silence stretched between them. Then slowly, Celeste smirked. Good. For the first time, they weren't adversaries. They were allies. And God help anyone who stood in their way. The night was heavy with tension, the kind that thickened the air and made every movement feel weighted. Celeste adjusted the diamond bracelet around her wrist, the final piece of her disguise for the evening. Across from her, Alexander fastened the cufflinks of his tailored suit, his face unreadable as he prepared for the battle ahead. Tonight was the night they set the trap. Victoria and Damien thought they were in control. They thought they were winning. But Alexander and Celeste had other plans. As he straightened his tie, Alexander's gaze met hers in the mirror. Are you ready? Celeste smirked. Are you? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I was born ready. With that, they walked out the door, together. The gala was an opulent spectacle, filled with New York's elite, flashing cameras, and carefully curated perfection. It was the perfect place for the ultimate deception. Victoria stood near the center of the ballroom, draped in a crimson gown that matched the blood she was so eager to spill. Damien was by her side, dressed in a dark suit, exuding the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. They had no idea what was coming. Alexander and Celeste entered the ballroom in perfect sync, their every movement choreographed for maximum effect. They were a team now, whether they liked it or not. Victoria's sharp gaze found them instantly. A slow smirk curled on her lips as she raised her glass. Showtime, she murmured to Damien. The room quieted as Alexander stepped onto the stage. His voice, deep and authoritative, carried effortlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. A round of polite applause followed. Alexander continued. There's been speculation about my upcoming marriage to Celeste Hart, rumors, accusations, and, let's be honest, quite a bit of intrigue. Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria's eyes gleamed. He's walking right into it. But tonight, Alexander continued, I'd like to set the record straight. Damien smirked, watching Celeste like a wolf watching prey. It's over. Alexander turned, his gaze locking onto Celeste. Celeste and I may have started this arrangement for our own reasons. The crowd stilled. Victoria's fingers curled around her glass. Damien leaned forward. But what we didn't expect, Alexander continued, his voice steady, intentional, was that through the lies, the schemes, and the betrayals, we found something real. Celeste's breath hitched. Alexander turned to the crowd. So to those who wish to tear us apart. His gaze flickered briefly to Victoria, then Damien. Let me save you the trouble. The air shifted. Celeste reached into her clutch and pulled out a small flash drive. With a flick of her fingers, she tossed it to the Whitmore legal advisor standing by the stage. That, she said smoothly, contains everything you need to ensure Damien Locke never sets foot in this city again. Damien's smirk disappeared. Victoria's face paled. The crowd murmured in confusion, but the real audience had already received the message. They had flipped the game. Damien took a sharp step forward, his face twisting with fury, but security was already in motion. Two men intercepted him, pulling him back before he could get any closer. You bitch, he hissed at Celeste. She tilted her head. You should have been smarter, Damien. Victoria's shock melted into quiet, simmering rage. You planned this? Alexander finally turned to his sister, his expression unreadable. I learned from the best, Victoria. For the first time in her life, Victoria had nothing to say. The game was over, and she had lost. Celeste sat on the balcony of the Whitmore estate, the city stretching endlessly before her. She had won, but at what cost? She felt Alexander step beside her before she even turned her head. He set down 2 glasses of whiskey, handing her one. To a partnership, he murmured. Celeste smirked. And here I thought you didn't trust me. Alexander studied her for a long moment before finally saying, I don't. Her lips curled at the edges. Good. They clinked their glasses, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't heroes, they weren't in love, but they were survivors. And for now, that was enough. The morning after the gala was unnervingly quiet. Celeste sat at the kitchen counter of the Whitmore estate, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The battle was over. Damien had been dragged out of the gala, Victoria had been publicly humiliated, and Alexander had done the unthinkable. He had chosen her. So why did she feel like the ground was still shifting beneath her feet? The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Alexander. He walked in with the same unreadable expression he always wore, pouring himself a cup of coffee before leaning against the counter opposite her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally, Celeste broke the silence. "You're quiet." Alexander sipped his coffee. "I'm thinking." Celeste arched a brow. "About what?" Alexander exhaled. "Victoria isn't done." Celeste smirked, but there was no humor in it. "No, she's not." They had backed her into a corner, but Victoria Lancaster was not a woman who stayed down for long. Alexander studied her. "And Damien?" Celeste set her cup down. "Gone for now, but he'll come back." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then we have work to do." She tilted her head. "We?" His gaze didn't waver. "You're in this now, Celeste, whether you like it or not." Celeste let out a slow breath. "And what exactly does that mean?" Alexander leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower. "It means if Victoria tries to take me down, she's taking you down with me." A charged silence stretched between them. Then Celeste smirked. "Romantic." Alexander didn't smile, because they both knew this wasn't romance, this was survival. Victoria Lancaster stood in the shadows of her private suite, her fingers curled around the glass of wine in her hand. She had underestimated Celeste. She would not make that mistake again. The soft click of a door opening made her glance over her shoulder. A man stepped inside. Tall, composed, dangerous. Liam Whitmore, their older brother. Victoria turned, tilting her head. "You came." Liam smirked. "You sounded desperate." Victoria's eyes gleamed. "Not desperate, strategic." Liam stepped closer. "Tell me, dear sister, what's so important that you called me?" Victoria smiled. "The fall of Alexander Whitmore." The Whitmore name was built on power, and power had always come at a price. Alexander had spent years ensuring he remained at the top, refusing to bow to anyone, even his own family. But as he stood in his study, reading the message on his phone, he knew the battle was far from over. Liam is back. His grip on the phone tightened. Of all the people Victoria could have called for backup, she had chosen him. Liam Whitmore. The eldest son, the heir that should have been. Alexander had taken everything from him, and now he was back to take it all back. The door creaked open. Celeste stepped inside, dressed in silk, but her expression was pure steel. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alexander exhaled sharply, tossing his phone onto the desk. "Close enough." Celeste frowned. "What's going on?" He looked at her, the weight of the past pressing down on him. Victoria just played her final card. Celeste arched a brow. "And who might that be?" A muscle in Alexander's jaw twitched. "My brother." Celeste's breath hitched. "You have a brother?" Alexander let out a humorless laugh. "That depends on how you define family." Celeste folded her arms. "Let me guess, he hates you." Alexander met her gaze. Hate is an understatement. For the first time since this game began, Celeste felt something foreign creeping in. Uncertainty. Victoria had been predictable in her cruelty. Damien had been a snake she knew how to handle, but a long-lost brother with a vendetta? That was new territory. Victoria sipped her wine, watching as Liam settled into the leather chair across from her. He looked almost the same. Tall, striking, but with a sharper edge than before. Years away from the Whitmore name had only hardened him. "Still dramatic, I see," Liam mused, stretching out. "Calling me all the way back here just to discuss Alexander?" Victoria smirked. "You didn't hesitate to come." Liam chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "That's because I owe our dear brother a reunion." Victoria leaned forward. "Then let's give him one he won't forget." Liam tilted his glass to her. "Tell me everything." Victoria's smile sharpened. She would burn Alexander's empire to the ground, and she'd use family to do it. Celeste stood on the balcony, letting the cold air clear her mind. She felt Alexander step behind her before she heard him. He was always so composed, so guarded, but tonight she could sense something shifting beneath the surface. "What happens now?" she asked. Alexander's voice was low, steady. "We prepare for war." Celeste turned, meeting his gaze. "And if I told you I don't trust you?" A smirk ghosted over his lips. "Then you'd be the first honest person in my life." Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Celeste reached for his hand. "So tell me, Alexander, how do we win?" He laced his fingers through hers, pulling her close. We play the only game Whitmores know. She swallowed. And what game is that? His lips brushed against her ear as he whispered, destruction. The Whitmore estate had always been a fortress, but tonight it felt like the battleground it had become. Shadows stretched long across the marble floors, whispers of betrayal woven into the very fabric of the family legacy. Alexander stood at the head of the grand hall, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression carved from stone. Celeste stood beside him, her gaze unwavering as she prepared for the final act of the war they had been forced into. And then the doors swung open. Liam Whitmore entered like a storm in human form, his presence commanding, his smirk knowing. Victoria followed behind him, her lips painted blood red, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of ruin. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Liam chuckled, slow and deliberate. "Brother, it's been too long." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Not long enough." Liam spread his arms. "Is that any way to welcome family?" Alexander didn't blink. "You lost the right to call yourself that years ago." Liam smirked. "And yet here I am." His gaze flickered to Celeste. "And this must be the infamous fiancé." Celeste didn't flinch. "Charmed, I'm sure." Liam tilted his head. "You know, I almost feel bad for you." Celeste arched a brow. "Why?" Liam's smirk widened. "Because you think standing next to him will save you." Alexander took a step forward, his voice like steel. "If you came here to make threats, let me save you the trouble." Liam chuckled darkly. "Oh, no threats, just a simple reminder." His eyes burned into Alexander's. "Everything you took from me, I'm here to take it back." Alexander exhaled slowly, his grip tightening. "Then you're wasting your time." Victoria stepped forward now, her voice smooth as silk. "Are we? Because, dear brother, while you've been playing house, we've been ensuring that your empire is about to crumble." Celeste's stomach clenched. "What did you do?" Victoria smiled. "I had help." The doors opened again, and Damien Locke walked in. Celeste's breath caught. He was supposed to be gone. Alexander's eyes darkened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Victoria." Damien smirked. "Oh, but it's your move, Whitmore." A tense silence filled the room. And then Alexander laughed. Slow, calculated, dangerous. Liam's smirk faltered just slightly. Victoria's brows furrowed, Celeste's breath hitched, and then Alexander spoke, voice smooth as glass. "You really think I didn't see this coming?" Damien stiffened. Alexander turned to Celeste, his eyes burning with something dark and knowing. "Do it." Without hesitation, Celeste pulled out her phone and pressed play. A recording echoed through the hall. Damien's voice, Victoria's voice, Liam's voice, every last word. Plans of sabotage, evidence of their alliance, threats, bribery, everything. Damien paled. Victoria's eyes widened, Liam's jaw clenched. Alexander smirked, checkmate. The room was deathly silent. Then Damien growled, "You set us up." Alexander's gaze never wavered. "You were always too arrogant to see it." Victoria's lips curled. "You bastard." Celeste stepped forward now, her voice calm but razor sharp. "Leave, and if you ever try to come for us again, we will destroy you." Liam's nostrils flared, but he said nothing. Damien turned on his heel, storming out. Victoria's eyes burned with hatred, but she knew the game was over. She followed, her heels clicking against the floor. Liam lingered for just a second longer, his gaze locking onto Alexander's. "This isn't over." Alexander smirked. "Yes, it is." And then Liam was gone. The doors slammed shut. The war was over. Celeste let out a shaky breath. "We won." Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "For now." Silence stretched between them. Then Celeste stepped closer. "So what happens next?" Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then finally, "We rebuild." She swallowed. "Together?" A slow smirk played at his lips. "Together." And for the first time, Celeste realized they hadn't just survived the game. They had mastered it. 1 year later, New York City. The Whitmore name still ruled the city, stronger than ever. Alexander stood in his sleek office, overlooking the skyline, a glass of whiskey in hand. The empire was his now, untouchable, unchallenged. And at his side, Celeste sat on the edge of his desk, flipping through business contracts as if she had always belonged there. In a way, she had. "You're smirking," Celeste mused without looking up. Alexander took a sip of his drink. "I enjoy watching you work." Celeste glanced at him, her emerald eyes gleaming. "Flattery, Mr. Whitmore?" His lips curled. "Observation, Mrs. Whitmore." Her breath hitched, just for a second, before she recovered. "Still getting used to that title." Alexander set his glass down, stepping closer. "Then let me remind you." Celeste let out a soft laugh as he pulled her to her feet, his hands resting at her waist. They had been through hell, but they had come out the other side stronger. "Tell me," Celeste murmured, tracing the line of his tie. "Do you think Victoria still wakes up screaming?" Alexander chuckled. "If she's smart, she's already found a new battlefield." Victoria had left the country after her public disgrace. Liam had vanished into the shadows. Damien? Well, he had made one final mistake, one that ensured he would never be a threat again. The past was exactly where it belonged, buried. Celeste tilted her head. "And us? What's next?" Alexander studied her for a long moment. "Whatever we want." Because this time there were no contracts, no schemes, no games, just them. Celeste smirked, looping her arms around his neck. "Then let's make sure the world knows who really runs this city." Alexander leaned in, his voice low and promising. "We already do." And as their lips met, the empire they had built together stood unshakable. Because kings were powerful, but a king and his queen, they were unstoppable.